Welcome to another formation review. In this video we're going to be going over arch formation. While arch formation isn't as popular as wedge, it definitely has its own niche. So in today's video we're going to be covering the same basics we did in the wedge formation video. That being the base stats and most common fits for the commanders, the specialty inscriptions, the normal inscriptions, and how to set up the best possible formation for your success. Without further ado, let's get started. First, let's cover the base stats and fits. Arch formation gives you a 5% more normal damage dealt. This applies to several things. This applies to your normal attacks, your counter attacks, and smite damage if you have it on that commander. As such, it tends to lean most commonly to smite damage commanders. Gorgo, Liu Che, the most recent Scipio Emilianus and William Wallace, all use arch formation. However, since normal damage is done by all commanders, you will also see it occasionally used to resist swarm on certain garrisons that don't necessarily need the skill damage bonuses. Heraclius does come to mind as a popular choice, and while I can't condone this, there is a dedicated group of people who do like to use arch on non-skill damage or non-normal damage commanders. This is okay, as you'll do better in terms of against swarm, but you will do significantly less 1v1, so you have to keep this in mind if you do decide to go this route. However, my recommendation is generally to use arch formation on those smite damage commanders, as you tend to get the best value overall, because every single one of their damage triggers can then benefit from this 5% bonus. Whereas wedge formation commanders that use skill damage only benefit on their actual skill damage uses, passive or active. Arch formation commanders are able to use those all if they're smite damage commanders. So you'll see the majority of players who use arch formation use them almost exclusively on smite damage commanders. Next, let's talk about the specialty inscriptions. Arch formation has a very interesting set of specialty inscriptions, so we're going to go over them one by one. First, destructive is a 3.5% bonus to normal damage dealt. Again, this is attack, counterattack, and smite damage. Whenever you launch a basic attack, there's a 10% chance to spend 100 rage to increase the damage of that basic attack by 70%. This is honestly something I'm not super crazy about, because even smite damage commanders need their rage gain. But if you're being attacked and you have a lot of rage generation, and you have a very solid rage engine, this 100 rage you're losing every 5 seconds is really not going to hurt you too bad. And the 70% will make that damage a lot more significant, especially if you're being swarmed and it triggers on a counterattack, you are going to deal a nice chunk of damage. The second skill is a 3.5% boost to normal damage dealt. And then whenever the troop launches a basic attack, it's a 10% chance to gain 20% normal damage dealt, and then 10% reduction to skill damage dealt. This is where it shows that when you use that garrison strategy of putting an arch formation on any garrison to resist swarm, you're losing out a little bit in the long run, because now you're kneecapping yourself on the skill damage dealt in this armament. But for normal damage commanders and smite damage commanders, terrific, because really the only downside is something that you're not going to see the end of because you're not dealing skill damage. The third is a skill damage resistance of 5%, and then for every 20% of a unit a target troop is lost, you deal 3% more normal damage, meaning if you're down to 20% or less on your target, you deal 12% more. This is honestly terrific, especially against swarm. It's one of my favorite to resist swarm and favorite overall for arch formation. Lastly, we have just an 8% boost to normal damage dealt. This is far and away the best overall, just because it's raw stat, no triggers are needed, no conditions need to be met, so it's something that's going to benefit you at any level, whether you're smite damage or using that off formation strategy of a garrison to resist swarm. This is going to help you in pretty much every way. So in terms of priority, you should be building this one first, then go for invincible, then go for straight to the point, because then you're not losing your rage, and lastly go for destructive if you can manage to do that in this order. So basically, if you can manage the order, go from right to left in the codex, and that'll give you the best overall jump first, followed by successively lower jumps in order of strength. And lastly, let's talk about optimization. Again, just like with the wedge video, if you want to hear about armament stat optimization rather than inscription optimization, check out that video. It'll be linked in the description. But for inscriptions, you obviously want to have as much damage reduction as possible, and you want to optimize for normal damage instead of skill damage. So, the ones that I want to point out that are outside of the standard 1.5% more normal damage, more march speed, that are basically inscription versions of armament stats, are Breaker, which gives you a 10% chance to reduce the target's defense by 15%. Pulverize, which is a 10% chance to gain 20% bonus to all types of normal damage. And Bellicose, which is a 10% chance to gain 5% bonus to all damage. These are great because they're actually, rather than being like Furious, where they're more oriented around the skill damage with the side of normal damage, these are all directly normal damage or all damage. Similarly, for Horn of the North, you have Respite, which is a 10% less damage taken, which is great because it's all damage. Requital, which gives you a really weak thing, and actually this is something I don't recommend here. It's a unique one, but not super great. Embattled is really good. Whenever you take any skill damage, you have a 10% chance to gain 50 rage. Guarded is another one. When you take skill damage, you have a 10% chance to reduce that damage by 20%. These are all terrific options I wanted to highlight. For the flag, Strategic is good if you are a rally or you are a field march, because you deal more damage to surrounded troops. Believe it is Brave, yet when surrounded, you deal 5% more counterattack damage. This is the anti-swarm skill, whether you are a field, rally, or garrison. If you can get this inscription, it is perfect. Desperado is an interesting one. You take 2% less damage when you have under 50% units. It's more of a very niche thing, because below 50% units, you're already taking more damage. So it's one I don't necessarily recommend over Strategic, but it's something to consider. Eclipsed is good at 2.5% less skill damage taken. But again, it's all about the damage reduction, and if you could just optimize to get that, it is ideal. Pursuer is same thing, 2% extra damage to 2% less damage taken. So it's the opposite of Desperado. And Cohesive is the same thing. Assertive, I like as well. If you are a field march, 2% more damage while you're on the map. But generally speaking, you'll notice that these follow the damage reduction is more important than damage dealt, which is more important than health, than defense, than attack. Lastly, I like Enduring here. 3% more counterattack damage of all types is probably my favorite. Smite is also good with 2% more normal damage. Smite probably gives you more on average, but Enduring is better versus Heavier Swarm. And these are the two that you really want to go for ideally, if you can stack them. Evasive is another option too if you just can't get Smite or Enduring. 1% less damage taken is pretty good. But with that, we will wrap up our discussion on Arch Formation. Just like Art Wedge, it does have a distinct niche, but it's not as wide of a niche because there's not as many normal damage commanders. But it does also have that nice little side option to resist Swarm. So it definitely gives you some unique options. But let me know down in the comments, is Arch Formation your favorite? Or if you have a different favorite, which one is it? If you want to see me cover another topic as well, let me know down in the comments or join the Discord using the link in the description. And as always, good luck, fight well, and I will see you on the battlefield.